Why, hello, and welcome to Reading with Miss G. Today we will be reading chapters 32, 33, and 34 of Wringer. And one very important message we can definitely learn from this book is to be you. So let's see where our adventures take us to today. Please make sure you do fill out your form in its entirety and do not help each other with your answers. Yes, you actually need to listen for yourself and enjoy the story and see where your imagination can take you. All right, it would always help if I turned to the right page. Chapter 32. He awoke to Nipper pecking at his ear, and just in time. His father, earliest bird in the house, was coming down the stairs. He scooped up his pigeon and crouched down behind the sofa. When his father passed into the kitchen, he dashed up the steps and into his room. Glancing around, he saw no evidence of night visitors. The window screen was firmly shut. Everything was in its place. Every one thing, as soon as he found out, except one thing. He hadn't even had breakfast yet when the doorbell rang. As soon as he opened the door, he found himself facing the Nerf basketball. Curling around it were Bean's fingers. Who's Nipper? Palmer could not think fast enough. Beans pressed the ball into Palmer's nose. Who wrote this? He did not want to get Dorothy involved. I did, he said. So who is Nipper? Palmer blurted the first thing that came to mind. Me. It used to be my nickname when I was a little guy. He looked at them all. Before I knew you guys, Muddo stepped up beside Beans. We think Nipper's a pigeon. Palmer made a shocked face. Pigeon? What would I do with a pigeon? What would you do with cereal and nachos you got in your room? Said Beans. Palmer laughed, showing them how wrong they were. Snacks. I keep stuff in my room so I don't have to go all the way down to the kitchen. He wanted to kick himself for forgetting about Nipper's food. And where were you last night? Said Beans. It occurred to Palmer that he had a right to... It occurred to Palmer that he had a right to questions of his own. Where was I? Where were you? He glanced at Henry. Henry's face showed nothing. Where did you get my ball? Beans grinned. We came to see you last night. You weren't there, said Muddo. Palmer nodded. I know. I was sleeping overnight at somebody's. My cousin's. I wasn't here. Henry was staring at the sky. Palmer saw Henry for what he was, a captive strong enough to warn him about last night, but too weak to do anything except follow Beans. He saw in Henry something of himself, and worse, what he could become. Beans scowled at the ball at Palmer. You ain't Nipper. You're Snots. He dropped the ball to the ground and stepped on it. When he raised his foot, the foam ball reclaimed its roundness. Beans cursed and stomped on the ball with both feet, flattening it, grinding it into the sidewalk. For a full minute, he grunted with effort, and again the ball popped back to shape. He kicked it away. He yanked on Palmer's arm. Let's go. We gotta find Farquhar. They found Farquhar in front of the deli, eating chocolate cupcakes and drinking Coke. Beans announced, pointing to Palmer, Birthday boy, 10 years old. Slouched against the deli window, Farquhar took a swig of Coke. He swished it around and in his mouth. He raised his upper lip, giving himself a rodent-like face, and spit a thin stream of Coke between his front teeth. The boy shot backward. Farquhar peered at Palmer. Wringer, huh? Palmer did not answer. He needs the treatment, said Beans. Farquhar glared. You rushing me? Beans spread his arms. No, I'm just saying. Farquhar bit a cupcake in half. Chocolate icing covered his teeth. What's it look like I'm doing? Eatin', said Beans tentatively. Eatin' breakfast, said Farquhar, washing down his mouth full with Coke. The boys took another step back. You don't say nothing while I'm eating breakfast. You understand? All four boys nodded. They retreated to the curb and sat down, facing the street, not daring to even look at Farquhar. After a long time, they heard his voice. Okay. They turned. He was walking up the sidewalk. They got up and followed. He turned into an air shaft between two storefronts and went back to the alley. He stopped. He backed away from them, making space. All faces were grim. No one spoke. Farquhar pointed to the ground in front of him. He looked into Palmer's eyes. "Step up." Palmer stepped up. "Right or left?" "Roll it up." He rolled up his left sleeve up to the shoulder. He blinked several times. He looked around. He rolled his sleeves back down. He took a step back. He shook his head. Farquhar's brows pinched in surprise. "What?" "No," said Palmer. The word came out choked and dry. "No." "No," said Farquhar. A chocolate crumb was wedged between his front teeth. "No," said Palmer clearly this time. He heard shuffling behind him. "No, what?" Palmer moved away from them all, facing them all. They stared at him, waiting. He saw the foot grinding the ball, the name into the sidewalk. He heard the scream, heard it coming from a split second before others heard it. The scream that he knew had now been growing inside him for a long time. He planted his feet and bent over his knees and balled his fist and let it come out all the way out. "No, nothing, no treatment, no Wringer, no Snots." He thrust his scream at Beans. "I'm not Snots. My name is Palmer. My name is Palmer." He stepped back. He hunkered down. "No." Then he ran. Down the alleys, down the streets. He ran like he'd never run before. If Farquhar was with him, he would be caught. He knew that. But if not, he might be able to outrun the guys. He heard their sneakers slapping the pavement behind him. He heard their calls. "You're dead meat, Snots. I'm going to eat that pigeon of yours. I'm going to wring its neck and pull its head off. I'm pulling your head off." He ran, and he ran. Chapter 33. A bug crawled down the middle of his back. He tried to reach it, whipped it off his shirt, ran. He whipped off his shirt, ran a fingertip up his spine. It wasn't a bug. It was sweat. The sun boiled in a cloudless sky. The dumpster had been slowly reeling in its shadow, so that now he had to sit with his back flat against it, and his knees drawn up in order to remain wholly in the shade. The dumpster's metal flank felt cool and crusty against his bare back. His breath and his heartbeat had long since returned to normal. The noontime music of church bells had passed an hour ago, maybe two. He was hungry, thirsty, but also safe. The only other safe place being his own house, which was exactly 5.5 blocks from this dumpster behind the great grocer supermarket. A back door slammed. Out came a worker dragging 2 hugely swollen plastic bags. Seeing Palmer, he said, "You waiting to help me?" Was the man joking? He wasn't smiling. "No," answered Palmer. With a grunt, the worker heaved one bag, then the other into the dumpster. He looked down at Palmer. He wagged his head. Made in the shade. He went back inside. 5.5 blocks. In his head, Palmer plotted a course that, except for the final half block, kept him in his alleyways. Even so, streets would have to be crossed in broad daylight. And anyway, the guys themselves took alleys as often as streets. They could be anywhere. Around the corner. Behind a parked car. They could be in front of the great grocer right now asking people, "Did you see a kid?" They might already be spreading word around town. "Palmer LaRue has a pigeon." He knew that if in fact there had ever been in question, the question had been answered spectacularly by his actions of the morning. The back door slammed, the worker came out, but this time there was nothing in his hands but a can of Sprite. He stopped in front of Palmer and held the can down to him. It hadn't been opened. "You look like you need this, kid." It occurred to Palmer that this might be some kind of trick, but he was too thirsty to care. He took the can. It felt blessedly cold. He stared up at the man. He felt like crying. The man's lips almost smiled. "On the house," he said, and he was gone. Palmer snapped open the Sprite and drank the can empty, taking out time to only gasp for breath. He lay his head back against the dumpster and closed his eyes. In spite of himself, in spite of everything, for a precious few seconds, he felt good. His first idea had been to wait until dark, then make a run for home. As the sun dropped below the roofline of the great grocer, he began to see that the idea was bad. Nipper would be coming home soon. And who could say that they were not waiting for him? Maybe even on the porch roof itself, with stones, slingshots. Suddenly it was clear. He had to get home before Nipper. Now, he dropped the can, and he ran. Alley and street, he took the fastest way, driven by images of Nipper, flying into a blizzard of stones. As he approached the turn onto his block, it occurred to him that they might be waiting at his front door. It occurred to him that this might be his last minute on Earth. Dramatic much? He slowed down and thought of Nipper and ran on. They were not there. He burst into his house. He wanted to collapse right then and there, to rub his face in the living room rug, but he dared not stop. He took the stairs, 3 at a time, flung open the door. Nipper was at the window, on the sill, outside the cracked screen, and inside, sitting on the pillow, was the yellow cat. Panther facing the window, its head, as still as a statue, to its tail, sweeping slowly from side to side. It hadn't even bothered to look at Palmer. The closest thing was a comic book. Palmer hurled it. The cat hissed, screeched, leaped to the floor, and was downstairs before Palmer finished his scream. It was then, as he opened the screen to let Nipper in, that he knew the pigeon must go. Chapter 34. Dorothy was crying. Why, tomorrow? Because they know, he said for the 3rd time. He pounded the bed. They know, and they're not going to wait. Plus, Pigeon Day's coming up. It's only going to get worse. Henry wouldn't hurt Nipper. Henry doesn't count. It's the others, she implored. But why? Why can't you just hide him in the house or in my house? They'll find out. He spoke wearily, pacing. They were right in his room last night. The cat was here today. They know everything. They won't give up. What we really ought to do is take him out tonight, under the cover of darkness. She blurted, No! So he shrugged. Tomorrow. She slumped, facing the wall, her forehead leaning into it. Why don't they just let him alone? She looked at him as if the answer were his to reveal. What did he ever do to them? He looked up at the closet shelf where Nipper was roosting. He was born a pigeon. That's what. But how can you do it? She whined. The months of spring and summer had filed his nerves to a point. He was nearly galloping back and forth across his room, through the muffled volume of his voice, lest his parents hear his entire body screamed, How can I do it? How can I do it? Can't you get it through your head? They're going to kill him. Do you want him dead? Earlier in the day, Dorothy had seen the unflattenable Nerf ball in the street and had retrieved it. She stroked it now in her lap. Her voice was barely audible. I just don't want him gone. He went to the window. A quarter moon was out. He began to weep. Do you think I do? The next morning they met at 6 o'clock with bikes. Dorothy's bike had a wicker basket fixed to the handlebars. That's where the shoebox went. Palmer had dumped the toy soldiers onto the bed, poked air holes into the lid, and deposited the pigeon. They had told their parents that they were going on an early morning breakfast picnic to the park. In the basket also lay a box of donuts and many cartons of iced tea. They rode to the park and out of the park and out of town. They rode past the barbecue restaurant and Burnout Barn and the golf course, whose dewtop greens looked like silver ponds. They stopped, only to switch bikes when Dorothy could no longer bear to transport the basket. They pedaled down the roads they had seen only from a car before, and then down roads they had never seen at all. The only sounds were the whir of spokes, the crunch of tires. Up and down hills they rode and rode, until it seemed they must be in another state, if not another country. Palmer, leading the way, pulled off the road by a field where horses were grazing. Let's eat, he said. Okay, wait a minute. How can they feel like eating at a time like this? Back to the story. Dorothy took donuts and drinks from the back basket. Is this where we let him go? No, not far enough. Not far enough? He punched a straw into an iced tea carton and took a long sip. He shook his head. We have to go as far as we can. Pigeons can find their way back from a long way off. Dorothy broke off a piece of donut and stuck it under the lid of the shoebox. It was immediately snatched it was immediately snatched from her fingers. I can't even find my way back from here. You're not a pigeon. He bit into a donut. Even far is not far enough. It has to be confusing, too. She was alarmed. What do you mean? You're not going to blindfold him? He sneered. No, but something else. You'll see. He had taken only one bite of the donut. He slipped the rest into the shoebox. Let's go. Another endless stretch of riding brought them to an unfenced meadow. Palmer said, Here, and veered into it. Wait, he called back. Dorothy stopped at the roadside and watched Palmer drive her bicycle deeper into the meadow. The wheels jumped. The basket bounced over the clotted earth. Thistletops erupted. Wildflowers wobbled as the bike charged in reckless patterns only a fly could follow. Circles, figure eights, zigzags, crazy doodles. This went on for many minutes when suddenly the bike bolted on a beeline into the woods and beyond. Dorothy waited as long as she could before becoming impatient, then worried. She could not see an inch into the dense tree line. The sun was directly overhead, making shadowless desert of the meadow. The handlebars of the bicycle were hot. Then, there he was, popping from the woods, pedaling furiously straight at her, the donut box flying in the basket. As he came closer, she saw that his face was red, wet, his mouth twisted. The shoebox was empty. He did not stop nor look at her. With a clatter onto the road, it was a long time before he slowed down, allowing her to catch up. They switched back to their own bikes. They rode in silence. They asked directions at a gas station. They bought sodas and threw away the donuts. When they coasted the final hill into town, the streets were in the shadow. Wearily, they climbed the stairs to Palmer's room. Oh, wait, they're climbing stairs, not a ladder. I got carried away. But wait, Nipper was waiting on the windowsill. I hope you all so truly enjoyed my reading of this. And just remember, we're now learning the importance of being you and all the dangers it causes when you're not yourself. Have a great day.